In 1955, a boy's 10th birthday meant one thing. His father handed him a pocket knife, looked him in the eye, and said, "Don't cut toward yourself." That was the whole ceremony. No wrapping paper, just a knife and a rule. By Monday, every kid at school had seen it. Today, most American men under 40 have never carried a blade in their pocket. But here is the part nobody talks about. Number 11 on this list was carried by Abraham Lincoln during his rail-splitting years, and number 3 was so essential to the American frontier that George Washington owned one personally. These 15 knives built this country. Then we forgot every single one of them. Let's count them down. Number 15, the electrician's knife. Before multi-tools cluttered up belt pouches and big box stores sold cordless everything, every electrician and lineman in America carried a single folding knife purpose-built for wire. The typical pattern featured a sheepfoot blade and a dedicated screwdriver tip, both folding into a handle that fit flat against the thigh in denim work pants. Camillus and Schrade made thousands of these for the U.S. military under the designation TL-29, a knife so effective that the Army issued it from World War II straight through Vietnam. The sheepfoot blade had no point. That was the genius. A pointed blade near live copper wire meant a dead lineman. The flat tip let a man strip insulation by feel in the dark belly of a ship, or behind a plaster wall without puncturing the wire underneath. An Army-issue TL-29 cost the government about 60 cents in 1943. Linemen who came home from the war bought civilian versions at the hardware store for $1.50 and carried them for the next 30 years. The screwdriver blade tightened terminal screws on outlets, toggled breaker switches, and pried open junction boxes. 2 tools in a package thinner than a pack of Wrigley's. When plastic-handled multi-bit screwdrivers hit the market in the 1970s, the electrician's knife started disappearing from tool belts. Today, vintage TL-29s sell for $40 on collector sites. But the men who climbed telephone poles in 1962 would not have traded theirs for $100. Number 14, the hawkbill pruner. In the orchard towns of Washington State, the San Joaquin Valley, and the Blue Ridge foothills, the hawkbill was the only knife that mattered. Its blade curved inward like a raptor's talon, hooked and razor sharp, designed for one job, cutting living plants without crushing the stem. A straight blade pushes the branch away as it cuts. The hawkbill pulls the branch toward the blade, making a clean slice that heals faster and resists disease. Orchardists, tobacco farmers, and carpet layers all carried them. In the 1940s and 1950s, a case or Schrade hawkbill cost about $2 at the feed store and lasted a generation. Tobacco farmers in Virginia and the Carolinas used the curved blade to top and sucker plants all summer long. The motion was always the same. Hook the sucker with the blade tip, pull toward the body, flick. Thousands of times a day, 6 days a week, from June through September. The handle wore smooth as riverstone. Carpet layers discovered the hawkbill worked better than any straight blade for cutting carpet along baseboard edges. That inward curve followed the contour of the wall, slicing cleanly where a utility knife would skip and tear. When pruning shears went spring-loaded and carpet installers switched to retractable box cutters, the hawkbill lost its daily carriers. But for 100 years, it was the knife that fed America. Every apple you ate in 1955 was picked from a tree pruned by a hawkbill. Number 13, the Gunstock, named for its shape, not its purpose. The Gunstock knife had a handle that swelled at the butt end, mimicking the curved stock of a Kentucky long rifle. That distinctive profile was not decoration. The swell locked the knife into the palm during heavy cutting, preventing the hand from sliding forward onto the blade. Farmers who butchered hogs, split kindling, and cut baling twine all day long needed a knife that would not shift under pressure. The Gunstock delivered. Case, Queen, and Schrade produced Gunstock patterns through the 1950s and the 1960s, usually with a single long clip blade and jigged bone handles. A man could buy one at the general store for $3 and carry it every day for 20 years. The shape was unmistakable in a pocket. that pistol grip bulge pressing against the thigh like a handshake from an old friend. Farmers in Iowa and Nebraska recognized each other's knives the way city men recognize each other's watches. When slim, flat profile knives became fashionable in the 1970s, the Gunstock's bold silhouette fell from favor. Younger men wanted sleek. They wanted modern. They forgot that the old shape existed for a reason, and that reason was keeping all 10 fingers attached. Number 12, the muskrat. Two identical clip blades folding into opposite ends of a slim, serpentine handle. That was the muskrat. No wasted space, no redundant blade shapes, just two matched edges that doubled a man's working time between sharpenings. Trappers running lines along frozen creek banks in Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin carried the muskrat because a dull blade meant a ruined pelt, and a ruined pelt meant lost money. When the first blade dulled after skinning 3 or 4 animals, the trapper folded it away and opened the second without breaking stride. The symmetry was beautiful in its practicality. Both blades seated in the same handle meant the knife balanced perfectly in the hand, regardless of which end was open. Case made the muskrat famous, and by the 1950s, it had migrated far beyond the trap line. Electricians liked the twin blades. Farmers liked the balance. Whittlers liked having a backup edge always ready. A Case muskrat in bone handles cost about $4 in 1960. The pattern survives today, but the men who carried it daily are mostly gone. And with them went the understanding that two blades of the same shape was not laziness. It was brilliance. Number 11, the Congress. 4 blades folded into a handle that bowed outward in the center, creating a silhouette as distinctive as any knife ever made. The Congress was the gentleman's choice, the knife of lawyers, bankers, editors, and politicians who needed a blade for opening letters, trimming cigars, sharpening pencils, and cutting the string on parcels. Abraham Lincoln carried a Congress during his years splitting rails and riding the legal circuit in Illinois. The 4 blades typically included a sheepfoot, a spay, a coping, and a pen blade, each serving a different task. Tobacco workers in the South favored the Congress because those twin sheepfoot blades let them work twice as long before stopping to strop an edge. The curved handle was not just aesthetic. It distributed the weight of 4 blades evenly, keeping the closed knife balanced in a vest pocket without pulling the fabric. A good Congress from Schrade or Case cost $5 in the 1950s and announced something about its owner. This was not a working man's rough tool. This was a man who cut with precision and kept his nails clean. When ballpoint pens killed the fountain pen and letter openers became decorative, 2 of the Congress's 4 reasons to exist vanished overnight. The knife retreated to collector cases and the back shelves of old hardware stores. But in its time, it was the knife that governed the nation. Literally. First pattern break. Here's where it gets interesting. The American pocket knife was never just a tool. It was a rite of passage, a social contract, and a quiet declaration of self-reliance. A man without a knife in 1952 was like a man without a handshake. People noticed. When someone needed string cut, a box opened, a splinter dug out, or a belt notch punched, the man with a knife stepped forward. That small act of usefulness defined masculinity for generations. Hardware stores kept glass display cases at the front counter, not the back, because knives were the first thing a man looked at when he walked in. Boys pressed their faces against the glass and pointed. Fathers nodded or shook their heads. The whole transaction was silent and sacred. Now those display cases hold phone accessories. Number 10, the Copperhead, a single-ended knife with a gently curving handle and usually 2 blades opening from the same end. The Copperhead took its name from the snake, and the resemblance was intentional. The handle tapered gracefully, the bolsters gleamed like scales, and the knife had a certain dangerous elegance that set it apart from blunter, more workmanlike patterns. Young men carried Copperheads. It was a knife you chose because it looked sharp before you even opened it. Schrade, Case, and Queen all made Copperhead patterns, typically with jigged bone or stag handles that caught the light and drew the eye. The blades were usually a clip and a pen, long enough for real work but slim enough to slide into the front pocket of khaki trousers without printing a bulge. In the 1960s, a Copperhead cost about $3, making it the knife a teenager saved up lawn mowing money to buy. It was the first knife that was chosen, not inherited. That distinction mattered. A boy carried his grandfather's stockman out of duty. He carried a Copperhead out of desire. When the generation that came of age in the 70s stopped carrying knives altogether, the Copperhead lost its natural audience. It was always a young man's knife, and when young men moved on, the Copperhead had nowhere to go. Number 9. The canoe. 2 blades folding into a handle shaped exactly like its name suggests, with gentle bumps on both sides that mimicked the curved gunnels of a wooden canoe. The canoe pattern was a mid-century American classic, compact enough for dress pants but substantial enough for daily work. Typically carrying a spear point and a pen blade, the canoe lived in the pockets of insurance adjusters, school teachers, shop foremen, and weekend fishermen. Case made it famous in yellow composition handles and jigged bone, pricing them around $3 in the mid-1960s. The canoe was the knife you could carry to church on Sunday and to the lumberyard on Monday. It never looked out of place anywhere. That versatility was its greatest strength and its greatest weakness. The canoe did nothing spectacularly, it did everything adequately. And when Americans started demanding specialization in their tools, the quiet competence of the canoe became invisible. Men stopped buying knives that did everything decently and started buying knives that did one thing dramatically. The canoe slipped out of pockets and into junk drawers. Its shape is still beautiful. A perfectly balanced little boat that once sailed through 100 daily tasks and never asked for recognition. Number 8. The Texas toothpick. Long, lean, and lethal looking, the Texas toothpick carried a single slender blade that tapered to a needle point, flanked by 2 oversized bolsters that gave the knife a muscular, almost defiant appearance. Everything about it said Texas. Big bolsters, long reach, slim waist, and an attitude that did not apologize. The blade excelled at precise work, picking splinters, cleaning fingernails, scoring leather, piercing holes in belt straps. Cowboys and ranchers across the Southwest carried toothpicks because the narrow blade slid between fence staples, dug out cactus thorns, and opened feed sacks without tearing the burlap. A Case or Schrade, Texas toothpick cost about $3 in the 1950s. The smaller cousin, the peanut-sized mini toothpick, went for about $2. But nobody in Texas carried the mini. That would miss the point entirely. The toothpick was a statement. The bolsters wore bright, the blade stayed sharp, and the man who pulled one from his jeans pocket in a feed store was making a quiet declaration about where he was from and what he valued. Regional knife patterns defined geography the way accents defined speech. You could tell a Texan by his knife the way you could tell a New Yorker by his shoes. Number 7, the whittler. 3 blades, all opening from the same end, stacked in a slim handle designed to be held for hours without cramping. The whittler was the knife of front porches, general stores, and long Sunday afternoons. A man would open the long clip blade for rough shaping, switch to the shorter coping blade for curves and hollows, and finish detail work with the tiny pen blade, all without putting the knife down. Whittling was not a hobby in the way modern people understand hobbies. It was a social activity, a form of conversation, a way of being present without having to talk. Men gathered on benches outside the courthouse, on the porch of the hardware store, or under the shade tree in the town square, and they whittled. The shavings piled up. The talk came and went. The afternoon passed. The knife was the ticket to the gathering. A man without a whittler had to just sit there with his hands empty, and that felt wrong. Queen and Case made the best whittlers, $3 to $4 in the 1950s, and a good one lasted until the bone handles cracked from age and oil. When television moved conversation indoors and air conditioning killed the front porch, whittling died. The whittler knife died with it, not because the knife failed, but because the world it belonged to simply vanished. Second pattern break. Here is something that nobody tells you. The decline of the American pocket knife was not an accident. It was engineered. In the 1970s and 1980s, school boards across the country began banning knives on campuses. Before that, a boy carrying a pocket knife to school was as ordinary as carrying a lunchbox. Shop class required one. Boy Scout meetings required one. Whittling clubs met after school. A teacher might confiscate a knife during a test, but she handed it back at the bell. The weapon was not the knife, the weapon was intent. When zero tolerance policies swept through American schools in the 1990s, a generation of boys grew up without ever sliding a knife into their pocket in the morning. The ritual broke. Fathers who had carried knives since age 10 suddenly had no occasion to pass one along. The glass cases at the hardware store grew dusty. Case and Schrade and Queen kept making knives, but the audience shrank with every graduating class that had never been taught the weight of a blade in the pocket. That weight was confidence, responsibility, identity. A whole generation lost it, and most of them never knew it was missing. Number 6, the penknife. Originally designed with a single narrow blade for trimming quill pens, the penknife evolved into the refined gentleman's carry of the 19th and early 20th centuries in America. By the 1940s, most penknives carried two slender blades and a handle barely 3 inches long, small enough to disappear in a suit vest pocket, light enough to forget it was there until you needed it. Doctors, accountants, and professors carried penknives because they could trim a thread, open an envelope, or sharpen a pencil without looking like they had just come from a barn. The penknife was the knife that did not want to be noticed. It was private, personal, and quiet. A man's penknife said nothing about toughness and everything about preparedness. He did not pull it out to show. He pulled it out to use, then folded it away without comment. Case, Schrade, and Camillus made penknives in pearl, bone, and stag, pricing them from $2 to $6 depending on the handle material. Some men carried the same penknife for 50 years, the blade worn thin as a fingernail from decades of careful stropping. When the world stopped using fountain pens and started using Bic ballpoints, the penknife lost its namesake purpose. But the men who carried them kept carrying them because the knife had long ago stopped being about pens. It was about being the man who was always ready. Number 5, the sodbuster. One blade, one spring, one handle, no bolsters. The sodbuster was the most honest knife ever made. Nothing on it was decorative, nothing was unnecessary. The wide, slightly curved blade opened with a nail nick and locked into place with a simple backspring. That was it. Farmers, field hands, and day laborers across the Midwest and Great Plains carried sodbusters because they cost $1.50 and worked harder than knives costing 5 times as much. The blade shape was borrowed from ancient European folding knives, a deep-bellied curve that gave maximum cutting edge for the length. A sodbuster could open feed sacks, cut baling twine, slice an apple at lunch, trim a horse's hoof packing, and castrate a calf before breakfast. Case marketed the sodbuster as the working man's knife, and working men agreed. The handle was typically yellow composition or smooth bone, easy to grip with wet or greasy hands. The knife was light. The blade was wide. The steel held an edge through a full day's labor. When the workday ended, a man wiped the blade on his pant leg, folded it closed, and slipped it back into his pocket without ceremony. The sodbuster asked for nothing and gave everything. That is why it deserved more respect than it ever received. Number 4, the canoe jack. Also called the jackknife, the single blade or two blade jack was the knife every American boy received first. No frills, no fancy bolsters, just a blade, a handle, and a lesson in responsibility. From the 1920s through the 1960s, The jackknife was as essential to an American boyhood as a baseball glove. Fathers bought them at Western Auto, Woolworths, or the hardware store for under $1, presented them with a handshake, and stood back while the boy figured out the rest. Cuts were expected. Bandaging your own wound was part of the education. The jackknife opened boxes, sharpened sticks, cut fishing line, carved initials into trees, and served as the universal problem-solving device of rural and suburban childhood. Some boys traded knives the way later generations traded baseball cards, comparing steel quality and handle materials with the dead seriousness of diamond merchants. A boy's jackknife lived in his pocket from morning to night, 7 days a week, until the day he graduated to a stockman or trapper. Then the jackknife went into a dresser drawer where it stayed for 60 years, waiting to be handed to a grandson who would never come. Number 3, the barlow, the oldest American pocket knife pattern. George Washington carried one with a mother-of-pearl handle and a pen blade. Mark Twain wrote about them. For 300 years, the barlow was the knife that defined America. Originally made by the Barlow family of cutlers in Sheffield, England in the 1600s, the design crossed the Atlantic with the colonists and never went back. The Barlow's signature was its elongated bolster, a thick shield of metal that covered nearly half the handle, giving the knife extraordinary strength at the pivot point where lesser knives broke. One blade, sometimes two. A teardrop handle that fit every hand, from a 12-year-old boy to a 60-year-old farmer. Russell, Case, Schrade, and Cattaraugus all made barlows, pricing them from 50 cents to $3 depending on the era. The barlow was the knife of the frontier, the farm, the schoolyard, and the general store. It cleared land, skinned game, whittled toys, and opened letters. Soldiers carried barlows through the Civil War, both World Wars and Korea. The knife was so deeply embedded in American identity that losing one felt like losing a part of yourself. Boys searched their pockets with real panic when a barlow went missing. Men retraced entire days to find one. The knife was simple, tough, and utterly reliable. 3 qualities Americans once valued above all others. When those values shifted, the barlow had no defense. It could not become flashy. It could not become tactical. It could only be what it had always been, and that was no longer enough. Number 2, the trapper. 2 long blades, a clip and a spay, folding into opposite ends of a slim, elegant handle that measured about 4 inches close. The trapper emerged in the 1920s and overtook the barlow as the most popular pocket knife in America within a single generation. Originally designed for fur trappers who needed a versatile skinning knife that folded flat, the trapper quickly proved itself indispensable to everyone. The clip blade handled general cutting with a precision that heavier knives could not match. The spay blade, with its curved belly and blunt tip, skinned pelts, gutted fish, and castrated livestock without puncturing organs. Ranchers carried trappers, mechanics carried trappers, truck drivers, warehouse workers, and country preachers carried trappers. Case made the definitive version in yellow synthetic handles that glowed like a sunflower against blue denim. A Case trapper cost about $4 in 1960 and became the most recognized pocket knife in American history. The yellow handle was a signal visible across a room, unmistakable in a pocket. It said, "This man works with his hands, and he is ready for whatever comes next." Fathers passed trappers to sons with the same gravity that other families passed down pocket watches. The knife was a contract. Carry this, keep it sharp, and you will always be useful. When utilitarian carry culture faded in the 1980s and the 1990s, the trapper held on longer than any other pattern because it was too deeply woven into too many families. It is still made today, but the daily carry tradition that gave it meaning has dimmed to a flicker. Third pattern. Break. Consider what was actually happening every time a man reached into his pocket and produced a knife. He was solving a problem without asking for help. He was declaring competence. He was connecting himself to a chain of men stretching back 3 centuries, who all carried the same quiet capability. The pocket knife was never about violence. In a country of 180 million people in 1960, the pocket knife was the most commonly carried tool and the least commonly used weapon. It opened more birthday presents than threats. It fixed more broken things than it broke. The knife was a bridge between a man and his usefulness in the world. Take away the knife and you do not make the man safer. You make him less capable, less connected, less himself. Number 1, the stockman. 3 blades folded into a handle that fit the human palm as if it were designed by God rather than a cutler. The clip blade for general cutting. The sheep foot for scoring and scraping. The spay for detail work and livestock care. The stockman was the Swiss Army knife of the American heartland. Only it came first. It was built to last a lifetime, and it never pretended to be anything other than what it was: the most versatile pocket knife ever conceived. Case, Queen, Schrade, and Camillus all made stockman patterns, but Case owned the legacy. A Case stockman in jigged bone handles with chrome vanadium steel blades was the gold standard. In the 1950s and the 1960s, it cost about $4. Every rancher, farmer, feed store clerk, and country doctor west of the Mississippi carried one. The stockman was the knife your grandfather gave your father and your father gave you. It arrived with a ceremony that had no script but never varied. A handshake, a look, the unspoken understanding that this knife meant you were old enough to be trusted and capable enough to be needed. The stockman did everything. It cut fence wire, opened grain sacks, trimmed hooves, cleaned fish, whittled kindling, sliced apples, tightened screws with the flat of the sheepfoot, and dug splinters from calloused hands. The bone handles absorbed oil from a man's skin over the decades, darkening from honey to amber to nearly black. The blades thinned with each sharpening until the steel held an edge so fine it could shave the hair off a forearm. A well-used stockman told the story of an entire life: where the man worked, what he built, how long he lasted. The stockman sat at the top of this list because it was more than the most popular knife pattern in American history. It was the physical embodiment of a value system that believed every man should be useful, prepared, and quietly competent. That system is fading. The stockman knows it. The blade is still sharp, but the pocket it once filled is empty. Try something. Next time you visit your father or your grandfather, ask him about his first knife. Watch his face, watch the way his hand moves to his right front pocket out of pure reflex, reaching for something that has not been there in 20 years. Then ask yourself, what was lost when American men stopped carrying a blade? It was not just a tool, it was a tradition, an identity, and a quiet promise that whatever came next, you were ready. These 15 knives built that promise, and every single one of them deserves to be remembered.